sloppy, lazy, spacey, incompetent. This is how many people with ADHD see themselves before their diagnosis. Tacit in this language is the presumption that their symptoms are personal failures, that they should have been able to easily avoid if only they were smarter, worked harder, or were more responsible. You might as well tell someone who has type 1 diabetes to stop having high blood sugar. ADHD is no different from any other disease. It is mediated by the biology of the body. It is mediated by genes, by ions, by tissues, and now we're beginning to understand that it is also mediated by neural networks. It is this new frontier of ADHD research that I would like to explore with you today, with the hope that more people will understand this condition for the disease that it is, and come to regard it with the requisite seriousness. But first, a formal definition of ADHD. ADHD is an ongoing pattern of inattention and or hyperactivity and impulsivity that interferes with functioning or development. There are a lot of misconceptions about ADHD, and so I want to briefly discuss a few things that ADHD is not. So ADHD is not something that we all have, right? We don't all have a little bit of ADHD. People naturally have varying levels of attention, some that may be above or below normal, but if it's not debilitating, it's not a disorder. It is not ADHD. Everyone has a certain baseline level of insulin or a thyroid hormone, but those of us who are naturally on the lower end of these measures do not necessarily have diabetes or hypothyroidism. Again, if it's not debilitating, you don't have it. It's also not a product of bad parenting or too much video games. There just isn't evidence behind the idea that ADHD comes from how you were raised. It is not a lack of discipline. It is not being irresponsible or unmotivated or careless. Nor is it a lack of intelligence. That would be a very different disease that would require very different interventions. Another misconception is that ADHD is only a problem in childhood. It is, in fact, a lifelong disease, and now more than ever, people who were missed in childhood are getting diagnosed as adults. ADHD is a neurological condition. It is a problem rooted in biology and therefore requires medical intervention. ADHD is debilitating. If you don't have the power to point your attention where you want it to go, you are essentially robbed of your own free will. And because of its basis in the physiology of the human body and the devastating effect it can have on an individual, ADHD is very, very real. This is a condition that ruins careers, marriages, and entire lives. So here is a nice, concise pie chart provided by the neuropsychologist Russell Barkley, one of the giants of neurological ADHD research. As you can see, it is thought that most of ADHD is a product of genetics. This can include inheritance. This can include new mutations in the genes of a child, interactions between different genes that amplify the risk of having ADHD, and can include the number of copies of a certain gene that are inherited. And I know that smoking is listed here, but according to Dr. Barkley, smoking itself is not actually thought to cause ADHD. It is thought that parents with ADHD tend to smoke, and they also pass on the genetic risk of ADHD to their children. The other category here encompasses other biological factors, as we only have research supporting biological etiologies of ADHD. No social factors are included in the list of potential causes. One relatively new area of research is how ADHD manifests in the human connectome. That is to say, we are now learning about how ADHD affects the way different areas of the brain are wired together. A study from 2023 showed that individuals with ADHD had decreased connectivity between various brain regions, including networks that help govern attentional control and sensory processing. Using functional MRI, another study from 2023 also found that children with ADHD exhibited different patterns of activity in networks governing attention and sensory processing, as illustrated by these abstract webs of activity with ADHD brains on the top row and subjects without ADHD on the bottom. As you can see, the constellations of brain region activity and connectivity trace out visibly different shapes between these two groups. While the first study I discussed demonstrated weaker connections between certain brain regions in people with ADHD, this condition can also exhibit strengthened connections between other areas of the brain. Depicted here is a visual representation of a study from the National Institutes of Health that analyzed brain images supplied by more than 8,000 youths. The areas of orange and red splotches were found to have stronger neural connections in individuals with ADHD. Namely, it was found that there was too much connectivity between the parts of the brain that help us plan and stay on task, and the parts of the brain that process visual stimulation, and the parts of the brain known as the default mode network, which is a circuit of structures that enable our minds to wander and daydream. I just thought to explain why individuals with ADHD are easily distracted by environmental and visual stimulation. These studies give us a new appreciation for the neurological mechanisms behind ADHD, but can they also have some clinical value? Currently, ADHD is a diagnosis that often requires multiple meetings with a psychiatrist and extensive neuropsychological testing. It is a diagnosis that is based on observed behavior, the output of the black box that is the human brain. But with advancements in neuroimaging, we might now be able to shine a light into that black box to see where ADHD is hiding amidst the complex tangles of wires. Perhaps these neural networks can serve as biomarkers that can allow us to more accurately and efficiently ascertain the diagnosis or prognosis of the disorder, and perhaps will offer a way to measure the effect of medical interventions. Measurable changes in the connectome in response to pharmacotherapy has been observed in patients with bipolar disorder. Here you can see a map of 8 different network nodes found to be significantly different in patients with bipolar depression before starting treatment. And after 6 weeks, you can see that those differences have been decreased to only 2 areas. For ADHD specifically, a 2016 study found that treatment with methylphenidate, a standard first-line medication for ADHD, created measurable increases in networks thought to govern attentional control, regions once again depicted by colorful splotches as seen here. These results may explain how stimulant medication helps those with ADHD and may give us a method of measuring treatment outcomes. While these findings are exciting, we still need more data before we can apply connectomic tests for ADHD in the clinic. In particular, we need more evidence to say that these connectomic differences are reproducible across different contexts and populations, that they are sufficiently cost-effective to be realistically utilized in a clinical setting, and that they can improve sensitivity and specificity for detecting ADHD beyond our current diagnostic methods. I hope that this small little lecture has given you a greater appreciation for the physiological basis of ADHD, including our developing understanding of how brains with ADHD are wired differently. In addition, I hope that you are left with a better understanding of the challenges that ADHD presents and why it is so important for physicians and society more broadly to understand and support those who live with this condition. Thank you.